Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Learning Hand Tool Woodworking. We are working our way through the Teacher's Handbook of Sloyd, and we are now on Mortise and Tenon. So you can see my bench right now is set up for dovetailing. So let me get everything switched around, and I'll meet you back at the bench here in just a minute. Okay, I got my muxin vise cleared off. I touched up my chisels, broke down a little piece of wood, so we are good to go. Before we dive in though, let's take a look at the book and see where we are. So let me pull that up. All right, friends, you can see from the book here that the Book of Sloyd calls it concealed tenoning or haunched tenoning. Uh, this is a style of mortise and tenon I've not seen anywhere else. I don't know if this is more predominant over on the continental side of Europe as opposed to the British Isles. But the style that we're going to make is actually more along the line with what you see in uh, English apprenticeship type thing, and that's the style that is predominantly taught here. So we're going to give that a try as opposed to this haunched mortise and tenon. You can also see that this is exercise 85. 85, and we are nowhere close to episode 85. Uh, they've got the joints laid out a little bit differently. And in fact, prior to the mortise and tenon, they have some very complicated joints, such as the oblique dovetail, the half-blind dovetail, some oblique slotting, things like that. I'm not exactly sure why he has them in this particular order. The only thing I can assume is that this is the order in which they appear in projects, because as a child is working their way through Sloyd, it's later in the course that they're building tables and cabinets, cabinets with face frames, things like that. So that could be why we're rearranging them and trying to take the joints in order of complexity as opposed to the order they appear in the book. The other thing that plays into this is my wife, who is my #1 fan, also my #1 critic, because she's not afraid to tell me the truth, has asked for a hallway table. So I need to practice my mortise and tenon before I attempt something like that. So we're going to jump in there, and I've got my tools laid out here. I got a couple of pieces of scrap oak. We are going to do a mortise and tenon that is more like a face frame as opposed to the skirt on a table, mainly because I've got pieces of scrap that will do that. So you've got my wood. We're going to use a couple of chisels here. I'll use a 1/4 inch chisel for the mortise. I have a 1/8 inch chisel that I'll use to clean out some of the waste. This is where a joiner's mallet would really come in handy, but I don't have a joiner's mallet, so we'll go with the this store-bought mallet. The book also calls for a mortising chisel. I do not own a mortising chisel, so we're just going to use our standard 1/4 inch bench chisel. So that will take care of the mortise. As far as the marking gauge, the book does recommend using a mortising gauge. So the mortising gauge actually has 2 pins here. One pin will be for the edge of the tenon and the edge of the mortise, the front side of it. The second pin is for the back side of that. You will go against a reference surface. Having a mortising gauge makes it easier, but it is absolutely not required to be able to do this work. I would actually like to have a second marking gauge to do this, but I dropped my wheel marking gauge on the hard floor, and it cracked the chipped the carbide tip, the carbide cutter. So we're not going to do that. As we lay out the tenon, we're going to use, go back to the combination square and the knife. And of course, we've got a dovetail saw. For larger tenons, you might want a sash saw or a carcass saw. I'm sorry, not a carcass saw. A sash saw or a tenon saw. But we're going to be small enough that the dovetail saw is going to work just fine. Also got some, got this screw clamp here to help me as I'm doing the mortise, help keep my hands out of the way. So I think that's it for all the preliminary stuff. So let's dive into this and see what we've got. All right, I've already set my mortise marking gauge. So because this is 3/4 inch stock, from the inside pin to the face is 1/4 inch. From this pin to the next pin is 1/4 inch to match the chisel. So the size, the measurements themselves do not matter as much as making sure that your mortise and your tenon is set to the size of your chisel, because your mortise is going to be whatever chisel you're using. Therefore, your tenon needs to be the same size. So I have this preset already, and we'll just get in and start marking for the tenon. So how are we going to do this? Let's use this piece here for the tenon. Because this is 1.5 inch stock, I'm going to go down about 3/4 inch into the stock. And again, the measurement itself does not matter nearly as much as being consistent. All right. So I'm going to take my, trying to do better at keeping my work to the camera. So take my knife, and we're going to put a nick in there. All right, and that marks out the 3/4 inches. And that will be the depth of the mortise, therefore should be the depth of the tenon. Put the knife in the nick. And again, this would be a lot easier if I had a second marking gauge, but I don't want to mess with the settings of my mortise gauge. Okay. You can even do the whole thing with a tri-square or with a combination square. If you don't have a marking gauge. Marking gauge just makes it easier. All right. So if my wood is square and I've been careful about my gauge marks, then as we come across here, we should see that this last edge here matches up with this gauge line, which means I have been fairly careful with that. All right, since I got that laid out, let's go ahead and just take a minute, actually just a couple of seconds, and open up that gauge line a little bit more. Get us a nice knife wall for the saw to fit in. So I think my knife walls have improved recently because I'm coming in at a much shallower angle than I did before. Previously, I was coming in a little bit too deep, and my knife wall or my chisel work would go in deeper than my gauge line. So I wasn't getting a nice crisp knife wall there. So coming in at a very low angle and just, taking a nice, easy little. Let's take our pencil and make sure that we mark a reference side. Okay, it's going to be very important that we do all of our gauging from the reference side so that when we put these together, they're going to match up. This is really important when you're dealing with two pieces that are the same thickness, and you want to make sure it's there in the middle. All right, let's take the marking gauge. This is a little inconvenient trying to do this for the camera. All right, but we'll make it work. All right, make sure you keep it nice and firm up against there. Notice the face is on the reference side. Keep it firm against the reference side. So here, let's try something a little different. We're going to take our chisel, follow that scribe line right there. See if we can't use that as the knife wall. All right. Loosen your grip. And when I say that, you know, I'm talking to myself more than anybody else. I have to tell myself all the time, loosen that grip. Down to the gauge line. We're going to come in tight against that knife wall, keeping the saw as vertically as possible. Until that comes off. Okay. Flip it over to the other side. Do the same thing. Saw in the knife wall. Hold the saw vertically. All right. All right, this is where we need to check square. If this shoulder is not completely square, then we could be in trouble. All right, so I see here that I did come off the line. Can you see that right there? I came off the line a little bit, went to the waist side a little bit too much, but that, I would much rather do that than be the other way. So we're going to have to come in, clean that up a little bit, but I'm perfectly okay with that. Okay. All right. One more thing to do with the tenon before we start working on the mortise. And now we got to take a 1/4 inch off each side to help us give us a shoulder all the way around. Hold that real nice and tight up against there. And that's going to give us our vertical cut lines. Loose. Just get it started with your thumb. Nice and loose grip. Grab your hands. All right, same thing here. Stay outside the line. Nice, loose, light grip. Saw in the knife wall. Trying to keep it vertically. Saw in the knife wall. That's square. That's square. All right, so shoulders, which are critical. They are square. All right, let's move over to the tenon. Normally we would lay out somewhere on this piece. This is going to be the reference side. Where that is going to be. You know, the overall length of the tenon. So let's come in here. Well, before we do that, let's take our marking gauge and what we're going to do is go from one line to the next, making sure that we have the face up against the reference side. So start there. I'm going to take the screw clamp here and the only reason I'm doing the screw clamp is so that I don't have to have my hand on the piece of wood itself. So we take our chisel and before I do that, let's put a little, we're going to come out of this thing. I'm going to put a knife mark at the two ends. All right, so the chisel now has some guides that can be used. So we're going to take our chisel. We are going to come off that knife line ever so slightly. Okay. We want to hold the chisel as close to vertical as possible. A couple of light taps. Move away from the end ever so slightly. A little bit more. Every tap should go a little bit deeper as you are, because the angle or the bevel on the chisel is going to push back towards the original knife wall. We don't want to do anything to ruin the integrity of the walls themselves. So we're not going to go all the way to the knife wall in either direction. Okay. If you've got waste in there, you can take your smaller chisel, come in here, kind of clean it out a little bit. And you can see that we go deeper as we start from here. As we go from here to here, it steps down. It's a little bit deeper each time. So we're going to come back in. Give it a couple of harder taps. Again, harder taps. And then with the smaller chisel to clean that waste out, again, we want to make sure we're not messing with the integrity of the wall itself. In here, now. Now that we're really close, we'll start working our way from this side now. So the goal, we've talked about this on previous videos. What is the aim of doing this? I mean, we could go out here and cut a tenon on a table saw within just a couple of seconds. So what is the purpose of doing this? Well, as we talk about Sloyd, one of the things we want to talk about, especially with the kids, we don't really want to talk about this, but we want to help them learn patience, accuracy, perseverance, and I can tell you, just this little bit of time that I've spent, my first Sloyd video was in May. Just that little bit of time, I can see my patience improving, worrying more about the process itself as opposed to just turning out a product. Maybe I should put it that way. Okay, we're going to have to check our depth here. Okay. Okay, we're at about a 1/2 inch, and we need to be at 3/4. So we can come in now, give it some good solid wax, and see if we have any waste right there. Looks like a little bit of waste. Shouldn't say waste, I should say there's a bit of a hump there. Wasn't completely vertical in that spot. Yep. The tenon itself is a little bit too thick, which I fully expected because I was off the line. Okay. So what can we do about that? Let's go back into the wax. Well, a couple things actually. Probably the best thing to do if you have a router plane available. Okay, this is one of the great things about a router plane. This is where it really kind of shines. Getting close. All right, by taking that out now, we can see the bruising, and that tells us where it's still a little bit too thick. We're going to switch to a slightly wider chisel and pare down the inside of the wall. That doesn't seem to be completely vertical. Narrow chisel. Almost. Okay. Right here is not deep enough. This end right here. All right. Is it a perfect? No, because I'm not a perfect woodworker. But not too bad. Let's check square. Gotta check square. Not perfectly square. Got a little hump right here. Can we take that out without messing up the integrity? Little hump right there. Right there. All right. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there because I have a tendency to overwork these things, and the more I work it, the worse it gets. So nice flush right there. That's actually pretty nice. Little bit of a gap. I mean, at one corner, I could probably keep working it down, but we're going to stop there. So traditional mortise and tenon from the English tradition. Again, a lot of patience required here, so this has been a great deal for me to kind of learn this and help really focus on accuracy. So again, a lot of fun. If you've never tried a hand cut mortise and tenon, I'm telling you, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And it's not perfect, but it's certainly worth the effort. So get out in your shop, make something that you're going to be proud of, and take care. God bless.